What do you mean Emily will own the company? My voice was steady but my hands clenched beneath the table. The elegant chandelier cast a warm glow over the dining room, yet the air had turned ice cold. My father, Richard Caldwell, the man whose company I had pulled from the brink of collapse, barely glanced up from his plate as he sliced into his steak. "Lauren, let's be realistic," he sighed as if explaining something to a child. "You're brilliant with technical work, but leadership? That's not your strength. We need someone with presence, someone who commands respect. Your sister is the best choice." Across the table, Emily took a slow sip of wine, a smug smile playing on her lips. She hadn't lifted a finger when Caldwell Enterprises was drowning in debt, but now with the company at its peak, she was being handed everything. "I built the software that saved this company," I said, my voice cutting through the clinking of silverware. "Without it, there wouldn't even be a company to inherit." Dad chuckled, amused, then casually pulled out his wallet, retrieved a crumpled bill and tossed it onto the table. "For your effort." I stared at the $50 line between my plate and my untouched wine glass. $50. 4 years of late nights coding until my eyes burned. For the sleepless weeks analyzing financial losses and designing the system that didn't just save Caldwell Enterprises from bankruptcy, it turned it into a $300 million industry leader. Mom shifted uncomfortably, casting me a brief glance, but she said nothing. No one did. I looked at my father, the man I had idolized, the man I had spent my life trying to make proud. And in that moment I understood. It had never been about merit. Not about effort, success, or loyalty. It was about control. "I see," I murmured, my voice quieter than expected. I picked up the $50 bill, turned it between my fingers, then calmly folded it into my napkin. And then I stood. "Lauren, don't be dramatic," Dad scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. I smiled. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm excusing myself. Clearly, my role in this family is nothing more than a background character, so I'll remove myself from the scene." Emily chuckled, barely hiding her amusement. "Lauren," Mom started, but I was already walking away, my heels clicking against the marble floor. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell or demand fairness. I simply left. The next morning I arrived at work early as always. A year ago the office had been suffocating, employees whispering about layoffs, department heads leaving before the inevitable collapse. But now it was thriving. My software had revolutionized logistics, reducing processes that once took weeks to mere minutes. We had expanded globally, securing top-tier clients. But today something felt different. As I walked through the lobby, I caught the nervous glances exchanged between employees. Conversations hushed as I passed. Something was coming. I reached my office only to find the door already open. Inside, my desk had been emptied. My computer was gone. The nameplate that once read Lauren Caldwell, CTO, was missing. Sitting comfortably in my chair, flipping through documents like she owned the place, was Emily. She glanced up with a bright, artificial smile. "Oh, good morning, Lauren. Didn't Dad tell you? I'll be moving into this office. You'll be reporting to me now." My stomach dropped, but my expression remained unreadable. "What's my position?" My voice was steady. Emily tilted her head, pretending to consider. Then she shrugged. "We'll figure something out. Maybe something in IT support." "IT support? In the company I had saved?" She smirked. "Dad actually suggested you take some time off. Relax. Maybe work on some hobby projects. But don't worry, you'll still be part of the company, in some capacity." I took a slow breath, my pulse pounding in my ears. They wanted me out. After everything I had done, every sleepless night, every problem I had solved, every sacrifice I had made, they were discarding me like an afterthought. Like I was worth $50. I looked at my sister. Then at the company logo etched into the glass walls. Caldwell Enterprises. A name that once meant family, loyalty, legacy. Now it meant betrayal. But I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I simply nodded. Understood. Then I turned and walked out. They thought they had won. That I would disappear quietly. They had no idea what was coming next. I left the office with my head high, my pulse steady. They thought they had buried me. Thought I would accept whatever scraps they tossed my way. Maybe even beg to stay. But as the elevator doors slid shut, a single thought burned in my mind. Watch me. The first thing I did was vanish. Not literally, I still showed up the next morning, still sat at the tiny desk they had assigned me, shoved into the farthest corner of the building, surrounded by interns who had no idea who I was. But I didn't fight back. I didn't argue. I watched. And in less than a week I saw exactly what was happening. Emily was drowning. She had no idea how to run a company, let alone one that had scaled into a multi-million-dollar empire. She spent her days in endless meetings, making decisions based on instinct instead of data. She dismissed department heads who tried to advise her, replacing them with her friends, people whose only qualification was knowing which wine paired best with which cheese. The company wasn't just vulnerable, it was on the brink of collapse. And I had built everything they were now destroying. That's when I made my decision. If they didn't want me at Caldwell Enterprises, I would build something bigger. Late one evening, long after most employees had gone home, I sat in a coffee shop across from three of the smartest, most capable people I had ever worked with. Jake, our former CFO, the man who had balanced the books when the company was drowning in red, who knew every financial loophole like the back of his hand. Maya, the best data analyst in the business. Maya had practically built our customer profiling system from scratch. David, our lead engineer, was the only person who knew my software as well as I did, because we had coded most of it together at 3 a.m. running on caffeine and pure desperation. All three had quietly resigned within the past month. They weren't idiots. They had seen the writing on the wall. Lauren. Jake leaned forward, his expression serious. What's the play here? I looked at them, then pulled out a folder. Inside was everything I had been working on in secret. We're building something new. I didn't need to convince them. They were in. There was one thing Emily and my father had overlooked. Yes, the software was technically under Caldwell Enterprises' name. Yes, they owned the rights. But the original code? The foundation of everything? I had written that long before I ever implemented it into the company. And the newest version, the one with the most advanced features? I had never uploaded it to their servers. It was still mine. For the next month I worked in silence, refining it, improving it, making it stronger, faster. Then I pitched it. Not to Caldwell Enterprises. To their competitors. Within 3 weeks I had multiple offers. By the end of the month I had a deal, a $50 million contract. And just like that, I wasn't just competing with Caldwell Enterprises. I was about to destroy them. The first signs of trouble for my father's company came quietly. A longtime client, one who had been loyal to Caldwell Enterprises for over a decade, suddenly pulled their contract. Then another. And another. Emily panicked. She demanded answers, fired employees at random, blamed everyone but herself. But the truth was simple. The industry had moved on. The next generation of software, the one I had perfected, was now running their competitors' systems. Caldwell Enterprises was outdated. And I was just getting started. 6 months later, I sat in a luxury hotel ballroom, sipping champagne as the keynote speaker wrapped up their presentation. This was the Tech Innovators Gala, one of the biggest industry events of the year. Every major CEO, investor, and executive was here. And this year I was the guest of honor. As my name was announced, I stood, walking onto the stage, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Tonight, we recognize the visionaries pushing the industry forward, the host said. Lauren Caldwell, the creator of the most groundbreaking logistics software on the market today, has transformed the way global corporations operate. Her company, Nova Systems, is now valued at over $500 million. The applause was deafening. But as I looked out into the crowd, my eyes locked onto a familiar face. My father, sitting in the back, next to Emily. Their company was on the edge of bankruptcy again. And they both knew it. I smiled. Not out of spite. Not out of revenge. But because I had finally learned the lesson they had tried so hard to teach me. I didn't need their validation. I had one. On my own terms. And this time, there was nothing they could do to stop me. It had been exactly 1 year. 1 year since that humiliating dinner. 1 year since my father tossed a crumpled $50 bill onto the table and told me I wasn't good enough. 1 year since my sister smirked, knowing she was being handed something she had never worked for. 1 year since I walked away without a fight. Only to win the war. Seated at the head of the Nova Systems conference table, I scanned our latest quarterly report, struggling to suppress a smile. Revenue, $320 million. Market share, 48%, and rising. Meanwhile, Caldwell Enterprises was in freefall. I had methodically dismantled every advantage they once held. Their clients had fled, their stock had crumbled, and just a week ago, a leaked financial report confirmed what I already knew. They were teetering on the edge of collapse. Then, right on schedule, the inevitable happened. At exactly 10 a.m., my assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Lauren, your father and sister are here to see you." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. So, it had finally come to this. Send them in. They entered like shadows of their former selves. Emily's designer ensemble couldn't mask the exhaustion in her eyes. My father, once so composed and confident, looked worn, defeated. They had lost and they knew it. "Lauren," my father began, his tone carefully measured. "We need to look." I gestured toward the chairs in front of me. They hesitated, perhaps realizing for the first time that they were stepping into my domain. But eventually they sat. Emily shifted uneasily, her nails tapping against the armrest. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad sighed. "Look, we've had our differences, but at the end of the day we're family. Caldwell Enterprises is struggling. We need your help." There was. I let the silence stretch, watching them squirm before finally speaking. "And what exactly are you asking me to do?" Dad leaned forward, clasping his hands. "We're willing to offer you a leadership position. Something meaningful. I realize now that we may have underestimated you." I tilted my head. "You realize now?" Emily finally looked up, her expression tense. "Lauren, don't be petty. We need you, okay?" I laughed. A real amused laugh. "You need me," I echoed. "That's interesting, considering that a year ago you told me I wasn't leadership material. That I was only good for technical work." Dad's jaw tightened. "You know how business works. Decisions were made. But we need to move forward. If you come back, we can rebuild Caldwell Enterprises. Together." There was again. Control. "They didn't want me, they wanted to own me." "And what position are you offering?" I asked, feigning curiosity. Dad straightened his shoulders as if preparing to close a deal. "You'd be second in command. Right beneath Emily." I blinked. Then I laughed again, louder this time. Emily flushed. "Lauren, grow up. You built some software, fine. That doesn't mean you know how to run a company at our level." The amusement vanished. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the desk between us, my voice turning to ice. "Emily," I said softly, "my company is worth $500 million. Yours is weeks away from bankruptcy. Explain to me again, who doesn't know how to run a company?" Silence. Cold, gratifying silence. Dad cleared his throat. "Learn. Please." That was the word that did it. Please. The same man who had dismissed me, belittled me, tossed money at me like I was a disposable employee instead of his daughter, was now begging. And I had never felt more at peace. "No." Emily stiffened. "Excuse me." I said no. I repeated, my tone unwavering. "I don't need Caldwell Enterprises. You needed me and you threw me away. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it." Dad exhaled sharply, frustration creeping into his voice. You're really going to let your own family fail? I met his gaze without flinching. I didn't let anything happen. You destroyed this company the moment you put Emily in charge. Emily shot up from her chair, her face flushed with anger. You're just bitter, she snapped. You've always been jealous of me. A slow, amused smile crossed my lips. Jealous, I said smoothly. Emily, I don't need to be jealous. I already have everything you wanted. I stood adjusting my blouse. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a real company to run. Dad left in furious silence. Emily stormed out, but just before she disappeared through the door she turned back. I hope you're happy, Lauren. I met Emily's gaze, utterly calm. I am. She walked out without another word. And as the doors closed behind her, I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Then I smiled because for the first time in my life I was truly free. The moment they were gone, I allowed myself a long, measured breath. They thought they could walk in here, throw out a few hollow apologies and expect me to clean up their mess. They had no idea who I had become. But as much as I enjoyed watching them squirm, I knew this wasn't over. Caldwell Enterprises was sinking, and when a ship that size goes down, it drags everything and everyone down with it. The question was, would I let that happen? The answer came 3 days later. The news broke everywhere. Caldwell Enterprises declares bankruptcy. Once an industry giant, Caldwell collapses overnight. How greed and family politics destroyed a $300 million company. Every article pointed to the same undeniable truth. The only reason Caldwell Enterprises had survived its first near collapse was because of me. The software I built had kept them afloat. And once I was gone, their downfall was inevitable. I was in a meeting when my assistant, Claire, knocked on my office door. Lauren, you might want to see this. She handed me a printed document. I scanned it quickly, a slow smirk forming as I reached the last paragraph. Caldwell Enterprises was being liquidated. Everything was up for sale. The headquarters, the remaining assets, even the Caldwell name itself. Dad had been desperate, taking out massive loans in a last-ditch effort to save the company. Now the banks were seizing everything. And the best part? I could buy it. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. That evening, as I sat in my penthouse overlooking the city, I let myself think. I had spent years fighting for recognition, battling the people who dismissed and belittled me. And now I had already won. Did I really need to crush them further? Then I remembered that night a year ago, when my father tossed $50 onto the table like a tip for a waitress. Like I was worth nothing. And just like that, my decision became crystal clear. The next morning I made my move. No investment firms. No third parties. I wanted them to know exactly who was taking everything from them. So I called the bankruptcy attorney handling Caldwell's liquidation myself. I'd like to place a direct bid on all Caldwell Enterprises assets, I said. Including the name. There was a pause on the other end. Miss Caldwell, do you understand what that would mean? I smiled. I understand perfectly. 1 week later, I sat at the very same boardroom table my father once ruled over like a king. Only this time I was the one holding the crown. The paperwork was laid out before me, a sleek black and gold pen resting atop the final contract. With a single signature, Caldwell Enterprises would belong to me. The empire my father built, the one he refused to let me lead, was now mine. Dad and Emily sat across from me, both ashen-faced. Dad looked like he had aged another decade in just 1 week. Emily wouldn't even meet my eyes. And I hadn't even signed the papers yet. I still can't believe you're doing this, Emily muttered. I raised an eyebrow. Doing what? Buying a failed company? Acquiring a name that no longer holds any value? She scowled. You know what I mean. Leaning back in my chair, I tapped my fingers against the polished wood of the table. Funny. A year ago you didn't think I was capable of running a company. And now you act like I have too much power. Dad exhaled sharply. Lauren, just sign the damn papers. I picked up the pen, hesitated, then slid the documents back across the table. Dad blinked. Emily frowned. What is this? Dad asked. A counteroffer, I said simply. He picked up the papers, scanning the first page. His eyes widened. You're dissolving Caldwell Enterprises? Emily gasped. You're shutting it down? I smiled. That's right. My father looked like he might explode. Why would you do that? I leaned forward, my voice steady. Because I don't need Caldwell Enterprises. I never did. But I do want one thing. I pointed to a single clause on the last page. Dad followed my finger and his breath caught. Emily snatched the document and read it aloud, her voice shaking. All remaining rights to the Caldwell name, patents, and intellectual property will be absorbed by Nova Systems and permanently retired. She lit up, furious. You're not just buying it. You're erasing it. I met her glare without wavering. Yes. Caldwell Enterprises would never exist again. The name would never be rebuilt. The company would never be resurrected. It would simply disappear, just like they had tried to make me disappear. Dad clenched his jaw. You're just doing this to get back at us. No, I corrected. I'm doing this because some things deserve to die. I picked up the pen again. This time I signed. And just like that, it was over. The Caldwell era was gone. And in its place, Nova Systems soared. With no competition from my father's failed empire, we expanded rapidly, securing exclusive contracts that had once belonged to Caldwell Enterprises. Their legacy had been erased. Mine had only just begun. 3 months later, I received a letter. No return address. Just a single handwritten note inside. Lauren, I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope one day you'll understand. Dad. I stared at it for a long moment. Then without hesitation I tossed it into the fireplace. As the flames consumed the last remnant of Caldwell Enterprises, I smiled. Because I had finally, completely and utterly won. 3 more months passed. It had been half a year since I erased Caldwell Enterprises from existence. Half a year since I signed the final document ensuring the name would never rise again. Half a year since my father and sister walked out of that boardroom with nothing. And yet for the first time since this all began, I felt peace. Nova Systems was thriving. With no competition from Caldwell Enterprises, we had expanded aggressively, securing every major client that had once been my father's pride. Revenue, $500 million. Market dominance, 62%. Status, undisputed leader in the industry. But it wasn't just the numbers that satisfied me. It was walking through my office every morning and seeing a company built on merit. Employees who were there because of skill, not nepotism. A business I had built on my own without needing my family's approval. But as much as I wanted to move forward, the past had a funny way of lingering. Especially when the invitation arrived. An unmarked envelope. A simple cream-colored card with elegant gold lettering. The Caldwell Family Annual Gala. I had almost forgotten about it. Every year for as long as I could remember, my parents had hosted the most exclusive event in the industry. Back when they still had power. But this year my father wasn't hosting it. Someone else had taken over. Someone who had bought their mansion at auction after the bankruptcy. The invitation was nothing more than a formality, sent by someone who had no idea about the history between me and the Caldwells. An accident, really. I could have thrown it away. Instead, I made a decision. I was going. Not to prove anything. Not for revenge. But to end this story once and for all. I arrived in a sleek, custom-tailored black gown, stepping out of my car with the quiet confidence of a woman who had nothing left to prove. Inside, the gala was just as extravagant as I remembered. Glittering chandeliers, elegant music, and a sea of wealthy elites sipping champagne, pretending they still controlled the world. But this time I was the most powerful person in the room. And they all knew it. Whispers followed me as I moved through the crowd. Is that Lauren Caldwell? No, she runs Nova Systems now. Didn't she destroy her father's company? I ignored them. I wasn't here for them. I was here for one thing. Then I saw them. My father and sister. They weren't the center of attention anymore. No powerful executives surrounded them, no million-dollar deals being discussed in hushed tones. Instead, they stood off to the side, shadows of who they used to be. My father looked smaller than I remembered. The once commanding presence that had loomed over my childhood was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar. Regret. Emily, on the other hand, still carried herself high, but I saw the cracks in her mask, the way her fingers clenched around the stem of her champagne glass, the way her eyes flicked toward me then quickly away. For the first time in our lives, I was the one with power. And they both knew it. I walked toward them, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Emily stiffened. My father turned. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger. Not resentment. Just defeat. "Lauren," he said. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. I tilted my head slightly. "Dad." A long silence stretched between us. Then he sighed. "I suppose this is the part where you gloat." I smiled slightly. "No, Dad. This is the part where I say goodbye." Emily blinked. "What?" "I didn't come here to throw this in your faces," I continued. "I didn't come to remind you of everything you lost. Because frankly, that's not my concern anymore." I set my drink down on a passing tray and met my father's eyes one last time. "For years I spent my life trying to earn your approval. Trying to prove I was good enough." I exhaled slowly. "But I don't need that anymore." I turned to Emily. "And I don't hate you. I never did. I just pity you." Her face tightened. "Because unlike you, I didn't need to steal power," I said. "I built my own." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I gave them both one last look. Then I walked away. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But because for the first time in my life, I was free. I left the gala without looking back. Without the need to prove anything. Because this was never about revenge. This was about becoming who I was meant to be. And as I stepped into my car, heading back to a company, a legacy, a future that was entirely my own, I smiled. Because this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning.